There are stories that begin in the most unlikely of places, where love does not follow the straight lines of expectation, but instead takes root in the cracks of circumstance. This is the story of Jhon, a young man whose hands carried the marks of honest labor, and whose heart, though humble, held the quiet courage to dream beyond the boundaries that life had set for him. Jhon was a plumber, no stranger to hard work, nor to the condescension of those who looked at him and saw only the dirt beneath his fingernails, not the dignity behind his work. Yet, despite the weight of struggle, he carried himself with a kind of quiet nobility, the type that did not ask to be noticed, but could not be ignored. On one seemingly ordinary morning, Jhon received a call that would change the course of his life forever. It was a request to repair a plumbing issue at the mansion of one of the wealthiest families in the city. The name on the order was Susan Davenport, a woman known in whispered circles for her arrogance, her extravagance, and her icy disdain for those she deemed beneath her. For Jhon, this was simply another job, another chance to earn enough to cover rent, to put food on the table, to keep moving forward. But he could never have predicted that behind those iron gates, within the walls of marble and glass, awaited not just work, but the beginning of a love story that would test him, transform him, and ultimately surprise everyone who thought they knew how such tales were meant to unfold. The mansion loomed before him like a fortress of wealth. Polished stone steps led to towering doors, and everywhere he looked there were signs of privilege. Gardens manicured to perfection, fountains carved from imported stone, and cars lined up in the driveway whose price tags could buy entire neighborhoods. Jhon parked his modest van at the far end, feeling the sharp contrast between who he was and the world he was about to enter. But humility did not mean shame. Jhon reminded himself that every person, no matter how rich, depended on the quiet labor of men like him. With that thought, he gathered his tools and knocked on the grand door. It was opened by Susan herself. Draped in silks, her jewelry glittering in the morning sun, she looked Jhon over with eyes that scanned not just his appearance, but the very essence of who he was. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but not one of welcome. It was a smile edged with superiority, the kind that measured a person and immediately found them lacking. "You're the plumber?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Jhon nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am. I was called for the job." She sighed, as though even his presence was an inconvenience. "The bathroom upstairs is leaking. Try not to make a mess." Without waiting for a response, she turned and swept down the hallway, leaving Jhon to follow. It would have been easy for him to shrink under the weight of her arrogance. But Jhon had learned long ago that dignity was not something granted by others. It was something you carried within yourself. He set to work quietly, methodically, focused only on the task. Yet fate has a way of bending paths when we least expect it. As Jhon knelt beside the sink, tools in hand, he heard the sound of laughter, soft and melodic, drifting through the hallway. He turned slightly, and there she was, Grace, Susan's daughter. She appeared like a beam of light in the otherwise cold mansion. Her beauty not only in her delicate features, but in the warmth that radiated from her presence. She was young, closer to Jhon's age, her hair falling in soft waves, her eyes curious and kind. She stopped when she saw him, tilting her head slightly. "Are you fixing the sink?" she asked, her voice carrying none of her mother's sharpness. Jhon looked up, momentarily caught off guard by the contrast between mother and daughter. "Yes," he said simply, offering a small smile. "Just a few leaks. Shouldn't take long." Grace stepped closer, her interest genuine. "I'm glad someone is finally doing it. It's been broken for days, but my mother, well, she likes to complain more than she likes to fix things." There was a playful mischief in her tone, the kind that hinted at a spirit unafraid to see the flaws in her own world. Jhon chuckled softly, though careful not to overstep. "I'll do my best to make sure she has nothing more to complain about." For reasons he could not explain, Grace lingered. She watched him work, asking small questions here and there, not out of idle curiosity, but out of a desire to connect, to understand. Jhon answered politely, but inside he felt something stirring, something unfamiliar yet undeniable. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was radiant. It was the kindness in her eyes, the sincerity in her voice, so different from the cold detachment he had expected in this house of wealth. Time seemed to move differently with her nearby. What should have been a simple repair stretched into a quiet conversation that felt effortless, natural. Jhon found himself laughing more than he had in weeks, and Grace, in turn, seemed captivated by the simplicity of his honesty, the way he carried himself without pretense. For her, accustomed to a world of shallow flattery and empty ambition, Jhon's authenticity was like fresh air after a storm. But just as quickly as the moment bloomed, it was shadowed by Susan's return. She swept into the room, her eyes narrowing as she saw Grace standing beside the plumber, their faces lit with shared laughter. "Grace," she said sharply, "don't you have better things to do than bother the help?" The words sliced through the air, heavy with disdain. Grace's smile faltered, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. But Jhon rose to his feet calmly, meeting Susan's gaze without flinching. "The job is finished," he said quietly. "Everything should be working now." Susan handed him the payment with a flick of her wrist, as though tossing a bone to a beggar. "You can leave." Jhon accepted it with dignity, refusing to let her scorn touch the pride he carried in his work. But before he turned to go, his eyes met Grace's one last time, and in that brief exchange, unspoken words passed between them. A promise, a question, a spark of something that could not be ignored. As Jhon walked out of the mansion and back to his modest van, his mind replayed the encounter again and again. He told himself it was foolish, that a man like him had no place dreaming of a woman like Grace. Their worlds were too far apart, separated not just by wealth, but by expectation, by family, by the sharp disapproval of a mother who would never allow such a connection. And yet, in the quiet of his heart, the memory of her smile glowed like a flame against the cold. What he did not know was that Grace, standing at the window of her room, was watching him drive away, her own heart stirring with something she had never felt before. In a life filled with privilege but lacking meaning, Jhon had appeared like an unexpected answer to a question she didn't know she had been asking. And though her mother's voice echoed in her ears, warning her of propriety and appearances, Grace felt something stronger rising within her, the desire to choose her own path, no matter how unexpected it might seem. That night, Jhon lay awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering why a simple plumbing job had left him so restless. He could still hear her laughter, still see the way her eyes lit up when she spoke. And in the silence, he whispered to himself words he dared not speak aloud. "She deserves better than this world she's trapped in. And maybe I could be part of that better." Fate, however, is never content to leave such sparks unattended. It fans them, nurtures them, until what begins as a fleeting glance becomes a story that can no longer be contained. For Jhon and Grace, the road ahead would not be easy. It would be marked by scorn, by obstacles, by the heavy hand of a mother determined to crush what she did not understand. But love, real love, is not so easily dismissed. And even in the face of arrogance, it finds a way to grow. This was only the beginning. The days that followed should have carried on like any other for Jhon. He returned to his routine of early mornings and long hours fixing pipes, repairing leaks, working in homes that often looked down on him while depending on his skill. Yet something was different. The memory of Grace lingered, soft but persistent, like a melody that would not leave his mind. Each time he tightened a bolt or turned a wrench, her laughter echoed in the background of his thoughts, and every pause seemed filled with the image of her smile. Jhon knew he was being foolish. After all, what were the chances of ever seeing her again? He was just a plumber, moving through the city in a battered van, living paycheck to paycheck, while she was the daughter of wealth, surrounded by people who would never allow a man like him to stand at her side. And yet, fate rarely plays by the rules of logic. Grace, too, found herself restless. Surrounded by luxury, she realized how hollow her life had become. She attended luncheons with her mother, listened to endless gossip about the elite, and smiled at young men her mother paraded before her. Men polished on the outside, but empty within. None of them made her heart quicken. None of them made her laugh with genuine joy. Compared to Jhon, they seemed like actors on a stage, reading lines without soul. She thought of him when she walked the long corridors of her home, imagined his sincerity whenever her mother's shallow friend spoke, and wondered what it would feel like to live in a world guided not by wealth, but by truth. It wasn't long before their paths crossed again. The mansion's pipes, as if conspiring with destiny, suffered another problem, and once more, Jhon received the call. His heart beat faster when he saw the address, though he tried to calm himself, reminding his mind that it was just another job. But deep down, he hoped, and when he arrived, stepping through the polished doorway once again, he found Grace waiting in the hallway, as if she had been anticipating his return. Her face lit up the moment she saw him. "You're back," she said softly, almost as though it were a secret meant only for them. Jhon smiled, trying to keep his composure. "Pipes don't seem to like this place much." She laughed, and it was the same sound that had stayed with him since their first meeting. Only now it felt even more familiar, more dangerous, because it tugged at the deepest parts of his heart. As he worked, Grace lingered again, asking questions, teasing him about how serious he looked when he focused, sharing small pieces of her life in the mansion. She told him how suffocating it felt sometimes, how every detail of her existence was managed by her mother's expectations. Jhon listened, his hands busy but his heart open, offering her something she rarely received in her world: genuine attention. But the fragile thread of their growing connection was soon interrupted by Susan's sharp voice echoing through the hall. She swept in with her usual elegance, her eyes narrowing when she saw her daughter standing too close to the plumber. "Grace," she snapped, "don't you have lessons to review? Or is it more important to waste your time watching someone tighten bolts?" Her words carried not only disdain, but warning. Grace, embarrassed yet defiant, muttered that she had everything under control, but Susan's gaze turned cold as she shifted it to Jhon. "You," she said curtly, "you've been here too often. Perhaps you're intentionally doing a poor job, so you'll keep being called back." Jhon straightened, wiping his hands calmly, refusing to let her insult shake him. "I take pride in my work, ma'am. If there's a problem, it's with the pipes, not the workmanship." His voice was steady, respectful, but firm. For a moment, Susan seemed taken aback by his refusal to cower, but then her lips curled into a smirk. "Be quick and leave when you're done." As she walked away, Grace's eyes met Jhon's, full of apology and quiet admiration. He offered her a small smile, as if to say he understood, as if to tell her that no words were needed. That evening, when Jhon returned to his apartment, he found himself writing her name on a scrap of paper, as though seeing it in ink would make her reel beyond the walls of her world. Grace, on the other hand, stood at her window once again, watching the lights of the city below, wondering what it would be like to walk those streets by his side, away from the weight of her mother's shadow. Days turned into weeks, and though their meetings were brief and always under the watchful eye of Susan, the bond between them deepened in small, stolen moments. A smile shared when no one else was looking. A quick exchange of words before Susan entered the room. A glance that lasted too long, saying everything they couldn't dare to speak aloud. It was Grace who finally found the courage to push beyond the barriers. One afternoon, when Susan was out attending a charity gala, Grace slipped away and found Jhon finishing his work in the kitchen. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. Would you like to meet outside of here? Somewhere away from all this?" Jhon froze, his heart thundering in his chest. He wanted nothing more, but fear clawed at him. Fear of what her mother would do, fear of the impossibility of their worlds. Yet when he looked into Grace's eyes, filled with hope and desperation, he found himself nodding. "Yes," he whispered. "Tell me where." Their first meeting outside the mansion was modest, in a quiet cafe tucked away from the busy streets. Jhon arrived early, nervous, wondering if she would truly come. But when Grace walked through the door, her hair tucked beneath a simple scarf, her clothes chosen to blend rather than to shine, his doubts melted away. She smiled at him, and it was as though the entire world narrowed to just that moment. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Grace confessed her dreams, how she longed to study art, how she wished to travel beyond the confines of her city, how she felt trapped in a gilded cage. Jhon shared his own struggles, his childhood of hardship, his determination to build a life with honesty and hard work. And in their exchange, they found something rare, a reflection of themselves in each other, a kindred spirit beyond the boundaries of class. The cafe became their secret haven. Each time they met, their connection grew stronger, their laughter deeper, their silences more comfortable. Grace discovered joy in simplicity, in the way Jhon's hands bore the marks of labor but also tenderness when he brushed against hers. Jhon discovered hope in the way Grace looked at him, not with pity or curiosity, but with genuine admiration, as though she saw not what he had, but who he was. But secrets rarely remain hidden for long. One evening, as Grace returned from one of their meetings, Susan confronted her. Her eyes sharp as knives, she demanded to know where her daughter had been. Grace hesitated, her cheeks burning, but Susan's instincts were sharper than any lie. "It's that plumber, isn't it?" she hissed, her voice low with fury. "Do you have any idea how ridiculous this is? Do you understand what people will say? He is beneath you, Grace. Beneath us." Grace, for the first time in her life, did not cower. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling but resolute. "He's not beneath me, Mother. He's more of a man than any of the people you bring into this house." Susan's face darkened, her fury almost palpable. "You will not see him again," she declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. But Grace's heart had already chosen, and no command could undo what she felt. That night, she sent Jhon a message, her words filled with both fear and determination. "She knows, but I can't stop seeing you. I won't." Jhon read her words under the dim light of his small apartment, torn between fear of what this could cost her and the overwhelming certainty that he could not let her go. For the first time in his life, Jhon felt that love was not just a dream for other men, not just a luxury he could never afford. It was real, it was here, and it was worth fighting for. And so, their story, once a quiet spark, began to burn into something undeniable. It was no longer just glances and secret smiles. It was defiance, courage, and the fragile yet unbreakable strength of two hearts refusing to be torn apart. Little did they know the greatest test still lay ahead. Jhon left the mansion that evening with his hands still marked by the day's work. But his mind wasn't on the pipes he had fixed. It was on Grace, the girl whose smile seemed to shine through the walls of arrogance her mother had carefully built. Grace had been polite, kind, and curious about his life, something he was not used to when working in wealthy homes where people rarely looked him in the eye. For Jhon, who grew up with little but dignity and determination, Grace felt like a glimpse of a world that had always been out of reach, yet strangely warm and human. The next few days, Jhon went back to his routine, repairing leaks, fixing broken faucets, and living his modest but honest life. Still, Grace's voice echoed in his mind. He wondered if she thought of him too, or if, like most people of her world, she had already forgotten him. But destiny had other plans. A week later, Susan called him back. This time it was the heating system, and Jhon knew he would see Grace again. When he arrived, Susan greeted him with the same cold superiority as before. She looked at him as though he were invisible, except for the work she demanded. Yet Grace appeared not long after, carrying a tray of tea. She smiled at Jhon, her eyes lighting up the otherwise tense atmosphere. While her mother barked instructions, Grace quietly placed the tray beside Jhon, whispering, "You're back." That simple phrase sent a warmth through him he hadn't felt in years. As Jhon worked, Grace lingered nearby, asking about his day, his dreams, and his family. He told her about his late father, also a plumber, and how he had taught Jhon the trade. He admitted that he dreamed of one day opening his own small business, not to become rich, but to live with freedom and dignity. Grace listened with genuine interest, her heart touched by his humility and honesty. She confessed that she often felt trapped in her mother's world, forced to smile in circles of wealth she did not respect, longing instead for something real. Susan noticed their conversation and grew visibly displeased. "Grace, don't bother the worker," she snapped. But Grace, with quiet defiance, replied, "He's not just a worker, Mom. He's a person." Jhon lowered his head, torn between gratitude and fear, aware of the line he was dangerously close to crossing. That night, when he returned home, Jhon couldn't shake the thought that Grace had stood up for him. It was something no one of her world had ever done before. He lay awake imagining what life with her might look like, though he told himself it was impossible. She was a world apart, the daughter of a rich, proud woman who would never allow her to love someone like him. But love, when it begins, doesn't ask permission. The next time Jhon was called for work, Grace found him alone in the garden fixing a pipe. She brought him lemonade, and in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, their eyes met in a silence more powerful than words. She whispered, "I wish my life could be different. I wish I could choose freely." Jhon, his voice low and trembling, said, "Sometimes happiness is found where no one expects." In that instant, Grace realized what she felt for him was more than curiosity. It was love slowly blossoming, fragile but unstoppable. The days that followed were filled with stolen glances, secret conversations, and an unspoken bond that grew stronger each time they met. Grace admired Jhon's strength, his humility, and the way he looked at her, not as a possession, not as a rich man's daughter, but as a woman with her own soul. Jhon, on the other hand, marveled at Grace's kindness, her courage to see beyond wealth, and the light she carried despite her mother's harshness. But Susan was not blind. She began to notice Grace's unusual happiness whenever Jhon was around. One evening, she confronted her daughter. "Do not tell me you're entertaining foolish ideas about that plumber," she said coldly. Grace, gathering every ounce of courage, replied, "He has more dignity than most men we know, Mother. I won't let you decide who I can care about." Susan's face hardened, her pride wounded, her fear of scandal rising. She swore she would end it before it began. Jhon knew the battle ahead would not be easy. The world would say he wasn't enough for her, that he was too poor, too simple, too ordinary. But Grace had already made her choice in her heart. She didn't want wealth without love. She wanted authenticity, kindness, and truth, the very things she saw in Jhon. And so, against all odds, their story began to take shape, fragile as a flower pushing through concrete, yet powerful enough to challenge the walls built by arrogance and pride. The days after Grace's bold confession were filled with whispers in the mansion. Servants exchanged nervous glances, and Susan's temper grew sharper with every passing hour. Grace, however, felt lighter, as though a heavy weight had been lifted from her chest. For the first time, she had spoken the truth without fear, and even though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew her heart belonged to Jhon. Jhon, meanwhile, wrestled with conflicting emotions. Grace's declaration had filled him with joy he never thought he'd feel. Yet the danger of Susan's power loomed. He knew she could make life difficult for him, could use her wealth and influence to ruin his modest career. Still, as he worked through the night fixing pipes and wiring for his small clients, he couldn't shake the memory of Grace's eyes when she said she loved him. That memory alone gave him strength to keep moving forward. Susan, however, was not ready to surrender. She invited influential families to the mansion, parading their eligible sons in front of Grace, insisting she needed to see real men with real futures. Grace played the polite daughter in front of guests, but once alone with her mother, her defiance burned brighter. "Mother, I told you I love Jhon. No man in a suit and tie, no matter how rich, will ever change that." Susan's fury only grew, and her threats became harsher. One afternoon, Jhon was walking home when a black car pulled up beside him. Inside sat one of Susan's business associates, a man with a cold smile. "Listen, plumber," the man said, leaning out the window. "Susan doesn't want you near her daughter. Do yourself a favor and disappear. People like you don't end up with people like Grace." Jhon said nothing, but the warning weighed heavy in his mind. He knew Susan's reach was wider than he had imagined. Despite the intimidation, Grace refused to let go. She secretly visited Jhon's workshop, standing by his side as he worked, watching how carefully and skillfully he used his hands. She admired not only his strength but his patience, his humility, his quiet dignity. "You fix more than pipes, Jhon," she whispered one evening. "You fix the cracks in my heart." Jhon's chest tightened with emotion. He had never been praised in such a way, never felt so seen. He took her hand in his, promising silently to protect her, no matter the cost. But Susan's resolve only hardened. One night, she confronted Grace in her room. "If you continue this foolishness, I will cut you off completely. No inheritance, no protection, nothing. You will live like him, with dirt under your nails and pennies in your pocket." Grace, though trembling, lifted her chin. "Then so be it. I'd rather live in honesty with him than in emptiness with your approval." Susan's eyes widened, shocked at her daughter's strength. For the first time, she realized Grace might actually leave everything behind. Word of the conflict spread quietly among the staff and even into town. People admired Jhon for standing tall against humiliation, and many began to respect Grace for following her heart. The story of their love became a small flame of inspiration, whispered in markets and alleys. Yet Jhon knew that whispers alone would not protect them. He needed to prove he was more than what Susan saw, a poor plumber. An opportunity came sooner than expected. The mansion's grand hall suffered a dangerous structural issue with the old pipes, threatening to burst during a charity event Susan was hosting. Engineers had quoted weeks of work, but time was running out. Desperate, Susan was forced to call Jhon once again. Reluctantly, she allowed him inside, her pride stung by the necessity. Working tirelessly, Jhon solved the problem in record time, saving Susan from humiliation in front of her wealthy guests. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, Susan glared at him, torn between gratitude and disdain. Grace, however, looked at him with pride shining in her eyes. "You see, Mother," she whispered, "he is more capable than any of the men you admire. He doesn't just talk about success. He creates it with his own hands." Susan had no response. For the first time, her certainty wavered. She couldn't deny Jhon's skill, nor the respect he had earned from the very guests she wanted to impress. That night, as the event unfolded flawlessly thanks to Jhon's work, Grace found him in the garden. She pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore, Jhon. Even if the world turns against us, I choose you." Jhon's heart, once weighed down by doubt, now beat with conviction. He knew the storm with Susan was far from over, but he also knew that together, he and Grace could weather anything. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream, not just of loving her, but of building a life where they could stand side by side, free of fear. And as the moonlight bathed them both, their love felt unstoppable, like a seed pushing through concrete, determined to bloom against all odds. The morning after Grace's bold declaration, Susan's mansion was a battlefield disguised as a home. Susan paced through the marble halls, her anger simmering beneath every step, while Grace moved with a newfound strength in her stride. The air between them was no longer filled with silent compliance. It was heavy with unspoken defiance and a daughter's determination to claim her own destiny. Jhon, however, woke in his modest apartment with doubt gnawing at him. Grace had risked everything by declaring her love, and though his heart swelled at her courage, he couldn't ignore the danger of Susan's influence. He had seen men ruined by people like her, men who had worked their entire lives only to have it taken away with a whisper in the right ears. Still, he couldn't forget the fire in Grace's eyes. It was enough to silence his fears for now. Susan, realizing threats had not broken her daughter's will, decided to take a different approach. She invited Grace to lunch, speaking in a softer tone, lacing her words with manipulation instead of rage. "Grace, you are my only daughter. Everything I have built is for you. Do you really think throwing it all away for a plumber is wise? You deserve a life of luxury, of power. What can he give you but struggle?" Grace, steadying her voice, replied, "Mother, you confuse wealth with worth. Jhon gives me honesty, kindness, and respect. Those are luxuries money can't buy. Susan's smile faded, her patience cracking once more. If you continue down this road, Grace, I will disown you. But this time, Grace didn't flinch. Then I'll build a life without your approval. Meanwhile, Jhon received unexpected news. A local business owner, who had heard of his skill and reputation, offered him a contract to manage a series of properties. It was an opportunity that could change everything. Steady income, respect, and growth beyond odd repair jobs. Though he wanted to accept, his mind raced with doubt. Was this fate's way of proving he could stand on equal ground with Grace? Or would it draw Susan's wrath even more? When Grace heard of the offer, her eyes filled with hope. Take it, Jhon. Not for me, not for my mother, but for you. Show them all what I already know. That you're a man worthy of more than anyone imagines. Her faith in him sparked something inside Jhon. He accepted the job and poured himself into the work. His hands rough from labor, his nights long, but his heart steady. Slowly, he began to build a reputation beyond the shadow of Susan's disdain. Susan, however, saw his progress as a threat. To her, Jhon's rising success was proof that Grace's devotion wasn't a childish fantasy. Desperate, she orchestrated another confrontation. One evening, she arrived unannounced at Jhon's workshop. Standing among the tools and pipes, she looked around with disdain before turning her sharp gaze on him. You think a few contracts make you worthy of my daughter? You're mistaken. Walk away now, and I'll forget this ever happened. Continue, and I will make sure you regret it. Jhon, tired of being treated as less than human, finally found his voice. With all due respect, Mrs. Susan, your daughter is not a prize to be owned or bartered. She is a woman with her own heart, and she has chosen me. I won't walk away, not because I seek your approval, but because I love her. For the first time, Susan faltered. His words, simple and direct, carried a truth she couldn't dismiss. She left without replying, her silence louder than any threat. Grace, upon hearing what Jhon had said, embraced him tightly. You spoke the truth, and that's more powerful than all my mother's wealth. No matter what happens, Jhon, I'm proud of you. Their love, though still under siege, was no longer a fragile secret. It was a bond tested by defiance, strengthened by courage, and destined to face the final storm. And as they stood together under the dim light of his workshop, both knew the battle with Susan was reaching its peak. Yet, within that struggle lay the promise of a future neither of them had dared to dream, one where love could rise above arrogance, and where even the richest walls could not keep two hearts apart. The storm between Susan, Grace, and Jhon reached its breaking point one crisp autumn evening. The mansion, once a fortress of power and intimidation, now felt like a stage where every truth could no longer be hidden. Grace had grown fearless, Jhon had found his voice, and Susan, though still fierce, began to feel the cracks forming in the empire of control she had built around her daughter. That evening, Grace invited Jhon to dinner, not in secret, not in the quiet corners of the city, but at the very dining table where Susan had hosted business partners, politicians, and people who measured worth by bank accounts and titles. Susan sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her eyes cold, her fork resting untouched. Grace sat beside Jhon, her hand clasped in his, refusing to let go. The silence was deafening. Finally, Susan spoke. Grace, you embarrass yourself, parading this man into my home as if he belongs here. Jhon, calm but unshaken, met her gaze. With all due respect, ma'am, I don't want your home. I don't want your wealth. All I want is the chance to love Grace the way she deserves. Susan laughed, but the sound was hollow. And what future do you imagine? Fixing pipes while she wastes her life in a shabby apartment. Grace's voice rose, steady and fierce. A future built on love, not fear. A future where I am free to be myself, not just an extension of your pride. Susan's face flushed with rage, but beneath it was something more. A flicker of loss, the slow realization that she was no longer the one steering her daughter's life. For a moment, she looked almost fragile, as though she were facing not Jhon, but her own loneliness. After that night, Susan distanced herself. She stopped her threats, stopped her manipulations. Yet her silence weighed heavily on Grace. She longed for her mother's acceptance, but she refused to betray Jhon. Meanwhile, Jhon's new contracts flourished. His reputation spread beyond small repair jobs. Property managers and businesses began to rely on him. Slowly, he built something bigger than he ever dreamed, his own company. Grace stood proudly by his side, helping him organize paperwork late into the night, encouraging him when exhaustion threatened to pull him down. Their bond grew deeper, not from ease, but from shared struggle. Months passed. Winter rolled in, coating the city in frost. Grace and Jhon were preparing for their company's first anniversary celebration when an unexpected knock came at the door of Jhon's modest office. It was Susan. She looked different, less polished, less adorned by wealth's armor. For once, her eyes carried not disdain, but something closer to humility. "Grace, Jhon, may I come in?" Grace hesitated but nodded. Susan stepped inside, her gaze falling on the framed certificate that marked Jhon's official business registration. She lingered there for a moment before turning to him. "I underestimated you," she admitted. "I thought you were nothing, but you proved me wrong. And more importantly, you proved to me how much my daughter means to you." Grace's eyes widened. "Mother, are you saying?" Susan sighed, her voice heavy. "I may not like it, but I cannot fight it anymore. If this is truly what makes you happy, Grace, then I will try to accept it." Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she hugged her mother for the first time in months. Jhon, though still cautious, felt a weight lift off his chest. From that moment, everything began to shift. Susan never became warm or gentle, but she softened. She attended the company's anniversary celebration. She smiled, albeit faintly, when she saw Grace and Jhon laughing together. And though pride still clung to her, she allowed herself to see what she had ignored all along. Love was stronger than wealth, and no arrogance could break it. Years later, Jhon and Grace stood side by side, looking at the life they had built together. They never needed the mansion, the luxury, or the approval of society. What they had was richer than all of it combined. Love born of courage, tested by fire, and made stronger by defiance. And perhaps the most surprising twist of all was Susan herself. Though she never openly confessed her admiration, she began to support Jhon's company, recommending him to her wealthy acquaintances. In her own way, she had given her blessing, a quiet acknowledgement that love had won. So, the plumber and the daughter of the wealthy woman wrote their story not in marble halls or glittering towers, but in the steady beat of hearts that chose each other against all odds. And in the end, the greatest surprise was not that they had love, but that even those who once stood against them were changed by it. A story that began with pipes and prejudice ended with love and acceptance. A reminder that no wall of arrogance can keep out the truth of two hearts destined to be together.